Well, good evening, class. I hope you're ready for a very important lesson. And so you should have your notes out, should have your four-color pen, and you want to take notes as we go. And listen, you're watching a video, so you have the capability of using the pause button. Pause it if you need to. If you need to, rewind. And the other aspect is part of this lesson would have been taught in class on Friday. And so those of you that were in class, you can fast forward to the portion that is new material. And so you'll need to find that on the video. You can just go by your notes and tell where we left off, and then you'll want to continue on from there. Very, very important lesson, so I hope you'll pay attention. For the pre-algebra class, your title screens will always be blue, and that will help you to find your lessons. And be careful that you're listening to the correct lesson. So this is lesson 1.2, and so make sure that you're in the right place. This is the Flip the Classroom homework for August 29th, 2014. All right, so adding integers. Let's go ahead and get right on into it. So 1.2, and let me take care of my pens again. My default keeps changing on me. Okay, here we go. So 1.2 is adding one positive and one negative number. 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 All right, so let's go ahead and do a bit of review here to begin with, a few things that we've already talked about. So number one, review. And letter A. Think of them as positives and negatives. Think of them as, and then I'm going to go to green and write the word positives. Think of them as positives, back to blue for the word and then I'm going to use red for my negatives, and negatives. Think of them as positives and negatives. Now, if you look on the screen, you can see some positives on the bottom of the screen and some negatives. And that's really the way you want to think of them. You want to think of them as positives and negatives. So here's what I'm talking about. Let's suppose we had something like this. What if we had 5, and I'm going to write that in green, and I'm going to do a blue plus sign, and I'm going to use a parentheses here. A 5 plus a negative 6. All right, we're adding one positive and one negative number. Now again, what I want you to do is I want you to think of them as positives and negatives. All right, let me move these plus signs without rotating them, and they want to rotate on me. Let's see if I can grab these. No, they don't want to go. There we go. We'll get them over there one way or another. Oh well, they're a little bit skewed, but we can live with it. All right, positives and negatives technology. You love it or you hate it. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is represent right here is positive 5, right? We've got 5 positives right there. And let me see if I can grab my negatives without, no, they want to spin too. Wonderful, there we go. Okay, so here's what we've got. Here's the situation. We've got 5 positives and we've got 6 negatives. And that's the way you want to think of these numbers. You want to think of them as positives and negatives. Think of them as positives and negatives. So in whatever the format is, you want to think of them as positives and negatives. Now, the way I wrote it, green 5 plus and then parentheses negative 6, makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. And that's pretty clear. But in reality, we don't write that kind of a situation like that. Math is full of shortcuts. So without using any color here, let me show you how this would normally look. I'm going to do this to the right here, and it normally looks like this. Now, you might look at that and say, well, that's 5 subtract 6. Well, not really. Those two are exactly the same, and the right-hand example is the way it's normally written. So what do we really have? We really have 5 positives and 6 negatives. We really have, let's keep this one closer here, 5 positives and 6 negatives. That's what's going on. That's the situation. And that's how you want to think of your numbers. And so we'll keep reviewing this over and over again, and hopefully you'll get the idea and it will become second nature to you. Really what we want to do is try to train your brain to think the easiest way or the best way or the way with understanding, so you really understand what's going on with positive and negative numbers. B, we've already talked about this. So remember this, when opposite numbers are added, we're going to write that in blue, when opposite numbers are added, when opposite numbers are added, and then I'm going to go, well, we'll just write the sum is, when opposite numbers are added, the sum is, and we're going to finish in red. Do you know the answer? Are you thinking of it? Remember, you got to think in class. When opposite numbers are added, what do you get? What's the sum? And hopefully you remember it's 0. When opposite numbers are added, the sum is 0. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's important to really understand what's going on when you add a positive and a negative number. So let's do a few examples here. So let's suppose we had this 3 plus parentheses negative 3. 3 plus parentheses negative 3. Now, those are opposite numbers, yes? Hopefully you agree. Therefore, their sum has to be 0. It has to be. What do we have here? What we have is 3 positives plus, and I always write my positives in green and my negatives in red, right? We have 3 positives and we have 3 negatives. And we know when we add 3 positives and 3 negatives, we have nothing left. They cancel each other out. Okay, so that's the format there. We got a positive in the front, negative in the back. Second situation, what if we have the negative in the front? So let's do negative 7 plus 7. So number 2, negative 7 plus 7. And of course, these are opposite numbers again, right? So the sum has to be 0. We know that. So I'm going to start with my red here because my negatives are in the front. So I have 7 negatives, and I'm usually going to abbreviate negatives with NEG. And what do we have? Plus, and then go to green here, 7 positives, and I'll abbreviate positives with POS. So I've got 7 negatives and 7 positives. Okay? Now, again, be careful of this third scenario. This is the scenario that gives the students the most trouble. So number 3, let's do something like this. 5 minus 5. Okay, we don't have any problem with the answer. You know it's 0. That's no big deal. You've learned that in 2nd grade, maybe 1st grade. All right, 5 minus 5 is 0. But again, what do we have here? The first one is positive, so I'll start with my green. I have 5 positives. You don't see the plus sign there, but this is really 5 positives and 5 negatives. So this is really 5 positives plus 5 negatives. Again, math is full of shortcuts. If I were to write this out completely, it would look like this. That's my imply symbol. You may already realize I use that a lot. This is the exact same thing, 5 plus a minus 5. Exactly the same situation. But by writing it the way it's written on the left, the initial way, we avoid the extra plus sign and we avoid 2 parentheses. And so you're saving 3 keystrokes And math's all about saving keystrokes. So we just write it 5 minus 5. Okay, but you've got to train your brain to look at it in that respect that, hey, what we have here is 5 positives and 5 negatives. If you do that, you're going to be in good shape. C. Let me see if I can move all these out of the way here. Okay, so what we've got here then is letter C. So C. And the third thing we want to do to make sure, by way of introduction, make sure we understand what we're doing here, and this is C. And then I'm going to go to red, sign. The sign. Let's go back to blue. The sign of the sum will always be the sign of the sum. The sign of the sum will always be. The sign of the sum will always be the, and then go to red, sign. The sign of the sum will always be the sign, and I'm going to go blue for a lot here. The sign of the sum will always be the sign of the addend with the most. Of the addend with the, and I'm going to finish in red, most. The sign of the sum will always be the sign of the addend with the most. The sign of the sum will always be the sign of the addend with the most. All right, this is important, and this is something you should think about every single time you're adding positive and negative numbers. Because I have to tell you, why do most students, what's the number one thing students do to mess up positive and negative numbers? They get the sign wrong. In other words, your solution should be positive, you have it as negative. The solution should be negative, you have it as positive. Now, it's a problem, and you don't ever want to do that, and it should never happen. Because here's the reality. The sign of the sum will always be the sign of the addend with the most. It's very, very simple. And so every time you do a problem with positive and negative numbers, you want to make sure you're thinking, hey, what's going to be the final sign of this answer? So, for example, number 1. Suppose we have something like this, negative 11 plus 4. Negative 11 plus 4. Okay, well, remember here, what do you have? You have 11 negatives. I'm writing that in red, right? Our negatives are written in red. You have 11 negatives, and in green, what do you have? 4 positives. Okay, now, I'm not talking with the one with the greater value. I'm talking about the one with the most. 11 is more than 4. I don't care if they're positives or negatives. It doesn't matter. What's the one with the most? 11 is more than 4. There are 11 positives or 11 negatives and 4 positives. If we had 11 apples and 4 oranges, what do you have more of? You have apples. I have 11 apples. I have more apples. Okay, so because of this, we know this. The sum must be negative. It has to be. It's got to be. And look, you just need to think of this every time you do a situation where you're adding a positive and negative number. Just make sure that your solution is the sign of the one with the most. Example number 2. Let's suppose we had a negative 3 plus 10. Negative 3 plus 10. All right, so in this example, I have 3 negatives, so I'm going to write those in red. 3 negatives, 3 NEG. And I have 10 positives, going to write those in green. 10 POS. So I have 3 negatives and 10 positives. So again, my question is, what's the sum going to be? Well, in this case, the sum must be positive. Right? It has to be. There are more positives than negatives. The sum has to be positive. Has to be, has to be, has to be, has to be, has to be. Number 3. Again, be careful of this format. Let's suppose we have something like this, 7 minus 14. Uh-oh, there we go again. Stop thinking subtraction. You got to start training your brain, and you got to start thinking this. Let's write in green underneath, 7 positive, 7 POS. And remember, this is 14 negatives. I'm going to write that in red. 14 negatives. So the sum must be what? And hopefully it's a pretty simplistic thing. 14 is more than 7. So the sum must be negative. Has to be, has to be, has to be, has to be. And so that's the way you want to think about these problems, okay? The sum has to be, in this case, negative because there's more negatives than positives. This is really a key concept. I'm going to come back up here and put an asterisk by it. Maybe even I'll add a few smiley faces here. And so just remember this concept. It is very important. It's something you want to think about all the time so that you never miss a problem because of missing the sign. So that you'll never miss a problem because of missing a sign. Okay, all of this was underneath number 1 of review. So number 2. Number 2, how to add. All right, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How to add. How to add. And let's, by way of an example here, let's do an example, how to add. And I'm just going to go with something simplistic here. I'm going to go with negative, let's go with -5. I'm going to take my blue for a plus sign, and then in green, I'm going to write 3. So listen, again, some of you probably already know the solution to this problem, but what I'm after is trying to train your brain to understand why the solution is what it is. Because here's the thing, here's what textbooks say. Take the absolute value of the larger and subtract from it the absolute value of the smaller, and then the sign will be the one with the highest absolute value. That's kind of what they say, something like that. May not have said that perfectly, but that's the idea. Look, if we just understand what's going on, the problem is so much easier. So what do we got here? Let me drag a few negatives up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 negatives, and let me pull up 3 positives. Because that's really the problem. We got 5 negatives and 3 positives. Okay. So again, this is just a manipulative just to help you to see. But this is how we're going to do it. Okay, so we have a number, and I know I'm breaking the outline rules, and the English police are going to be behind me, but I'm going to give you a list, and so I want to number it. All right, so number 1 underneath. All right, what do you do first? Okay, when you're adding a positive and a negative number, what do you do first? Start with the one with the least. Start with the one with the least. Start with the one with the least. I'm not talking about value. I'm talking about how many there are. Start with the one with the least. Okay. So if you look at it, we have 5 negatives and 3 positives, right? Look at it. 5 negatives and 3 positives. So what's the one with the least? It is the 3 positives, right? Right there. The one with the least is the 3 positives. So that's how you want to start. Start with the one with the least. Number 2, take an equal amount of the one with more. Take an equal amount of the one with more. Take an equal amount of the one with more to match the one with the least. To match the one with the least. take an equal amount of the one with more to match the one with the least. Now, let me pause for a second and just help you guys understand something. Look, right now, this is taking quite a bit of time. And I understand that. And you might be saying, man, this is going to take me forever to add positive and negative numbers. And the answer is no. Here's what we're going to do. For the next couple of days, we're going to train our brains in what actually is going on, in what actually is taking place. Once we get our brains trained into what actually is taking place, we are going to find that it's going to be very, very easy then to figure out the proper solution in a manner that that's quick and easy. That's where we're heading. When we're done, it's going to be very, very easy to add a positive and negative number and get the answer correct. It's going to happen very, very quickly, and it's all based upon what actually is going on, which is what I'm trying to show you right here. So hang in there, all right? I know it's taking a lot of time right now just to do -5 plus 3, but the reality is if we get our brains trained, by the time we're done, it's going to end up being so much easier, so much easier, okay? So we just simply need to train our brains. If we do that, we will be in great shape. So take an equal amount of the one with more to match the one with least. Okay, so again, what am I going to do? I'm going to come up here and grab 3 of these, right? There's 2 of them. And let me grab a third one. Come on. Doesn't want to move. There we go. All right, so I started with the one with the least, the 3 positives, and I brought over the same amount of the one with the most, 3 of the 5 negatives. Okay, what do we really have right here? This right here is opposite numbers. That's a +3 and a -3. And we all learned already that when you add opposite numbers, you get, and hopefully you're thinking, 0. This all ends up being 0 and it's gone, right? 3 positives and 3 negatives, it's 0. This is actually what takes place. This is why the solution is the solution. Because 3 of the negatives wiped out the 3 positives. They wiped each other out and there's nothing left because they're opposite numbers. Okay, so let's go back to our list here. Number 3. The ones left will be the ones left will be the, and then I'm going to finish in green, solution. The ones left will be the solution. I don't know why I got an S on that word. The ones left will be the solution. So look up. We wiped out the 3 positives and wiped out 3 negatives in the process. What do we have left? 2 negatives. What's the solution? So we have left 2 negatives, and so what's the solution? -2. That's really what's going on. We wiped them out, and so we have -2 left. All right, again, look, if we can train our brain this way, then it's going to make the whole process really, really easy down the road. So hang in there. It's going to be a little bit longer in the beginning. Okay, we've got a little procedure we got to learn, but at the end, it's going to be way easier. So hang in there, hang in there, hang in there, hang in there, hang in there. Okay, how to add. All right, so number 3, examples. Number 3, examples. So how is it actually going to look mechanically? Okay, because you're not going to draw plus signs and minus signs. Okay, so how is it going to look mechanically? All right, so here we go. A. First example. Let's use our color. Let's go in red. Let's go -5. Let's get a blue plus sign. -5 plus, and then let's grab our green, and let's go a green 2. Okay, so remember, what are you supposed to do first? Start with the one with the least. So here's what I do. I'm going to take my green, I'm going to take an arrow, and underneath the +2, I'm going to write 2 POS. That means 2 positives. I start with the one with the least. Now I'm going to take my red, And from the negative 5, I'm going to draw an arrow over. And I'm going to take 2 of the 5 negatives, right? I have 2 positives. I need 2 of the 5 negatives. So I'm going to write 2 neg. Right? So now I have just taken my 2 positives and my 2 negatives, right? Just taking my 2 positives. I've taken 2 negatives to match it, right? And of course, these are being added up. And I like to box these in. And I like to say, what do they equal? 0, and cross them out. They're gone. Okay, now look, I used all the smaller one, the 2 positives. I used 2 of the 5 negatives. Now I have to determine what's left. And I'm going to go back to my negative 5. I used up 2 of them. What do I have left? 3 negatives. And this is the way I really want your work to look. We're going to do this for a couple days, and then we're going to learn the shortcut. And the shortcut is very short. Almost no work to the shortcut. Okay? But we got to get there first. So hang in there. And so look, that's our answer is what's left. And so finally, I can then write my answer underneath as negative 3. That's the solution. And that's the way I want your work to look, and that's the way we're going to do these for the first couple of days so that hopefully we can train our brain. Hopefully we can train our brain. So let's go back and let's try to help ourselves out. I'm going to use a little black here. I'm going to go like this and say first. I'm going to go like this and say second. I'm going to go like this and say third. Now, don't do that in your homework. I'm just trying to show you in your notes what you're doing first, second, and third, right? So again, what was the first step? Take the one with the least. What's the second step? Take an equal amount of the one with the most. Those will always equal 0 because they're opposite numbers. What's next? Determine how much is left, and that's going to be your solution. Okay? Again, I know that seems a little bit long, but in the long run, it's going to be so much easier. It's going to be so much easier. Okay, if you have room to the right, you can do B to the right. If you don't have room to the right, just do it underneath. I'm actually doing this lesson on a wide screen. I know your TV may not look that way, but that's the way my lesson, my board is. Okay, number 2, let's use our red here. I'm going to go negative 4. Blue plus sign. And then let's go in green and we'll go 9. All right, and I probably should have done this on the first one. First off, let's think about this. Okay, what do we have? We have 4 negatives and 9 positives, right? 4 negatives and 9 positives. And by the way, class, what will be the sign of the solution? Will the sign of the solution be positive or negative? Is our answer going to be positive or negative? Well, if you go back to the review part, we already talked about the sign will always be the sign of the one with the most. Well, what do we have more of? We have more positives than negatives. Our answer has to be positive, right? Has to be. All right, that's important. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this one. Now, do you always start on the right? Do you always start on the left? No. It's not right or left. It's the one with the least. You always start with the one with the least. So how are we going to start? With the 4 negatives. All right, so I'm going to take my red. I'm going to draw an arrow. I'm going to write 4 negatives. See, I've taken all of those negatives. I'm going to do my plus sign here in blue. And then take an equal amount of the one with the most. I'm going to take my arrow. And I'm going to take from these 9 positives, I'm going to take 4 of them. 4 positives. Again, these are opposite numbers. Therefore, they always equal 0, and we can cross them off. Go back and look at the one that had the most. I used up 4 of them. How many's left? 5 positives are left. By the way, don't short circuit your brain. Don't write plus 5 right there. Write 5 positives. Write how many are left. That's the key. It's a key concept. And you'll see that later when we get to the shortcut. So now again, my final answer can come underneath. And we just write 5. Remember, when writing positive and negative numbers, positive 5 is just written as 5. Right? And that's the solution. And that's how you're going to do these, and that's how each one is going to go. So let's keep going through some more examples to try to get you guys used to all the possibilities of all of what you'll see. Okay, so C. Okay, so example C here, example C. And let's go ahead and do this one. Let's go ahead and take our red and we're going to go -9, blue plus sign, -9, blue plus sign, take our green, and let's go 6. Okay, so again, we're looking at this and we're saying, what do I have? I have 9 negatives and 6 positives, right? What will your solution be, positive or negative? All right, hopefully you thought negative, right? Because there are more negatives than positives. Okay, so how do we start? Are you thinking? How are you going to start? All right, hopefully you said, I'm going to take the one with the least. What is that? 6 positives. So again, I always take an arrow because I'm taking these positives from that 6. I used them all. All right, 6 positives. Now I'm going to take an equal amount of the one with the most. So in red, arrow, 6 negatives. Remember, these always get added. So I'm going to put a little plus sign. And again, these are always opposite numbers. So what are they always equal? 0, right? And I cross them out because we used them all. That's it. We used all of the 6 positives. They were used up by 6 of the 9 negatives. What do you got left? So again, out of these 9 negatives, there are 3 negatives left. What is our final answer? -3. Hey, what do we get? Remember, we said we're 9 negatives and 6 positives. We should have a negative solution. Indeed, we do have a negative solution. Look, this is actually what's going on. This is what really takes place. This is why the answer is -3. All right, let's do another one. Trying to show you all the different possible scenarios so that you'll have examples of each one. All right, so that you'll have examples of each situation. All right, D. Let's take our green. Let's go 10. Pick our blue for a plus sign. Then take your red. And we're going to go in parentheses here, -14. Now again, let me remind you, normally you won't see that parentheses, but when you begin to teach students positive and negative numbers, we put the parentheses in. Okay, so again, we're trying to train our brains. Hang in there a little bit longer in the beginning, but it's going to help you all the way through your math. Look, you get this down now, you'll never have a problem with positive and negative numbers, adding them the rest of your life. Okay? All right, so hang in there. Okay, so again, you're looking. What do you got? 10 positives, 14 negatives. What's the solution going to be, positive or negative? I hope you thought negative. Okay, how do you start? How are you going to start? Well, hopefully you said, hey, I'm going to start with the one with the least. All right, I got 10 positives. I've just used them all. Now what do I need to do? I need to take as many of the one with the most. Boy, that switched on me. Don't know why it did that. But I am going to take then 10 of these 14 negatives, right? Going to take 10 of the 14 negatives. Now again, these are opposite numbers. So what are they always going to add up to? 0, and they're gone. Boom. Again, how do you finish? I used up 10 of the 14 negatives. How many are left? 4 negatives. So that's my solution, -4. How many are left? Hey, that's the way these go. And again, once you get it down, hopefully never again will you have a problem with positive and negative numbers. E. All right, so I'm going to do E below D because it's a similar type problem. All right, normally problem D will look more like this. So let's take our green. I'm going to go in green 13. And then go ahead and take your red and go -19. Now this is the way it'll normally look. However, it won't be green and red. It'll just be one color. And remember, you need to get used to looking at things as positives and negatives. And you've got to look at this and you've got to say, hey, I've got 13 positives and 19 negatives. That's the way you got to look at it. I've got 13 positives and 19 negatives. Get used to looking at it that way. I've got 13 positives and 19 negatives. Okay? So will your solution be positive or negative? Hopefully you said negative because there are more negatives than positives. Okay, how do we do the problem? Start with the one with the least. I'm going to take all 13 positives. I'm going to then take the same amount of negatives, plus 13 negatives. What does that equal? Equals 0 because they're opposite numbers. I used up 13 of the 19 negatives. How many are left? 6 negatives. Now, by the way, if you don't get 6, I can't help you. If you think 5, I can't help you. That part, hopefully, you can do. And again, even the shortcut will make that easier. So I have 6 negatives left. And so what is my solution? Negative 6. All right, look, class, remember, what are we trying to do? Train our brain to really think and understand exactly what is going on when you add a positive and a negative number. And we're going to do this for a couple days, and then we're going to learn a real quick, easy, simplistic method that will allow us to very easily and quickly get the solution with almost no work whatsoever. That's where we're heading, but we got to train our brain first. And so this is the concept. All right, hope you enjoyed the lesson. We will see you in school on Tuesday.